All right, so before we get started, Natalie did have a question about the 3-point bear. Let me unlock the room because I think she's on spring break, so she should be coming. I don't want her to like get stuck in the waiting room when I'm demonstrating. So the 3-point bear was new to your movement prep this week, I believe, and then we'll do it again next week till you kind of get used to it, because it's combining like 2 different movements, so you're almost like feeling one thing on one side while you're feeling another thing on another side, which makes it a little bit more difficult. So it's just like the regular bear at the start, but the idea is that you're getting and cueing like hip extension on one side while you're shifting like your weight mostly over to the other side. So I'm sort of getting like internal rotation on that one side and then hip extension on the other. So like this one side is more like in like that mid stance of gait, and this other leg is more in like that toe off. So you want to be like distance from the wall, not so far that you have to like lock out your leg straight to touch your foot, but not like super bent either. So just kind of imagine what you're like the bend in your knee that you might want at toe off, because we don't want to be locked out at the knee. We want to extend at the hip first and have a slight bend in the knee. This is sort of what we're mimicking here. So then readjust and like kind of breathe your way into it. So it'll be an inhale, exhale, everything engages. Inhale, extend, and press up. So now you'll breathe here, and then to get the hamstrings on board, you can also imagine pulling the foot up on the wall. So you're getting a co-contraction around this whole leg and joint. And the core will be firing, and we're going to build on this even to the next level, I think, in week 6. So what you should feel here is your core working, your hamstring, your quads, your calves, everything on that extended leg. And most of your weight should be over your left side. So your left glute should be working. So that's just sort of the overview of that 3-point bear. So we'll practice it this week and next week before we build on it. So just kind of get a feel for it. Does anyone else have any questions about anything before we dive in?
Talk about pogoing.
What was it? You mean like the sock hop dancing? Is that what you're talking about?
No,
Or
you're
was
pogoing.
Oh,
Pogoing.
not pogoing. I thought you were responding to me telling you to bring socks. I was so confused.
Oh, I need to go get some socks.
That's why I was like, oh, you'll find out. Because I like sock hop dancing is sometimes called pogoing. I don't know.
Isn't that what it was called? Like when you pogo?
Yeah, but I totally forgot about that because my brain was thinking about feet. I don't know. Okay, yeah. So the pogoing one, you can just start. Hard for me to show you on this wall, but pretend that my hands are flat on the wall. Just start. It's kind of like that foam roller up the wall scapular movement, but in this plane. So at first, just kind of like feel the scaps move, and then you can kind of just push off like that. Does that make sense?
My muscles don't move. My muscles don't move very well there, so but that makes more sense.
If you're feeling like yeah, they're both in the same workout. You can kind of switch things around and do that foam roller up the wall that maybe it's in the same workout or it's in another workout, but you can flip it into the workout and try it before that with your breathing and see if you can get a little bit more movement in that part of your body before you do it. I don't know, I'm standing like this. Sit down. Okay,
So any other questions before we go? Pull up. What did I say? Pull up. I made myself a note that says pull up, but I don't think I finished the sentence. Oh, I know what it was. Okay. It was, I needed to get my cheat sheet for the feet. I got it. Okay. So this is going to be two parts. The first part, we're going to talk about the pelvic floor. I'm going to just skim the surface of the pelvic floor stuff. And then on Sunday, Addie is going to talk more about it. So after this call, once you kind of get like the surface level, and we've been sort of talking about it, you know, as the weeks have gone on, but we're going to integrate it with actual running today. And then I'm going to post a question collection in the group after the call, and she'll like create a I'm going to send her this presentation and the questions that you guys have so she can like build on it for Sunday. And then the second half, we're going to talk about the feet. Even though the two like they're not necessarily connected, they totally are. And I think hopefully by the end you'll see that connection. And we're going to spend a lot more time on the feet because as a personal trainer, like feet is like a physical thing that you can see and touch and see it move. You can't really do that with the pelvic floor. I can't do that with the pelvic floor, and you can't really do that virtually with anybody with the pelvic floor. Maybe you could, things could get weird. I don't know. Anyway, okay. So let's dive into that. Let me share my screen. And then pull up the chat in case you guys have questions. Okay, so starting with the pelvic floor. Picture before, we talked about it in the first week. We're really focusing in that box of, you know, when your foot is on the ground, when we're talking about most of the training that we're doing, because that's just sort of, it's the most mechanically energy costly part of running. So if we're talking about optimizing our running, minimizing the energy it takes and being more efficient about it, like we want to focus on that part. But we are going to kind of look at the peripherals of it when we talk about the pelvic floor a little bit today. So, you know, when you land, you're loading, and then through mid stance, that kind of converts, you just kind of switch what you're doing and you're propelling and rebounding. With the pelvic floor, it's the pelvic floor ascending as you're loading, and then as you're propelling and rebounding, the pelvic floor descends, come back down. And then when you're pronate, when you're loading, your foot is pronating, and then you get to mid stance and the foot starts to supinate again. So we're combining all of those three things, and you'll kind of see these ideas flesh out as we go. So I just think that this is a really interesting, relatively new set of studies that shows the pelvic floor activity with running. And there's a couple like things I want to point out here with this. So that vertical line is your heel strike. So there is some pre-activity of the pelvic floor before your foot even hits the ground. It's like nose to contract back up. That is a whole nother conversation that I think would take like forever to go through, but I believe it has to do with the connection between the pelvic floor activity in your breath and the rotation of your torso as you run. So there's these like higher level movement people who talk about walking is breathing and breathing is walking. And that's because the rotation of your thorax as you move like changes. It's like, it's almost like an inhale and an exhale. It changes the pressure in your core and then the connection in your canister and the pelvic floor and all that. Like, it's kind of like weird stuff to think about, but all you really need to know, or you don't even really need to know it, I just think it's cool to think about, is that pelvic floor already starts to ascend before the foot even hits the ground. And then, you know, from here at heel strike on, I think this is more of a reactive contraction of the pelvic floor. And to me, it has everything to do with that foot pronating. And then the whole time, if you look at this dotted line, this is pelvic floor activity at rest while standing, which is above pelvic floor activity at rest while resting. So just think about like running and moving. They're all like endurance activities for the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is another muscle. It's going to get tired. That matters for incontinence, prolapse, all those kinds of things, but it also matters for just like movement, because the pelvic floor doesn't just hold in your pee and your internal organs. It does a lot more than that. So the subsequent papers with this showed that this, response increased with speed, which sort of makes sense, right? More impact, more speed, this whole response is going to be higher. But also it showed women with stress urinary incontinence show a higher level of contraction than people without. And they proposed a mechanism that it may be subconscious, that simply it's, they know that they have stress incontinence, so they're trying to hold more and contract more the whole time that they're running, or there may be something else that's going on that we don't really know about yet. But I thought that was really just interesting thing to consider, but also just to make the point that like, maybe if it's some other thing that we don't know about, we can't really speak to it. But if it is really just that subconsciously we're trying to like protect by contracting, like almost actively try not to do that. Like, because it's not helpful. It has to go through this like up and down to be the most effective, because it really is. I just put those lines on top of it. So we can extend that line out, the pelvic floor ascending to actually before the heel strike. And then you can think about as the body is like preparing to load already before you actually hit the ground. So eventually the idea is, and maybe a lot of us could be there now, is that the pelvic floor should just do its thing naturally. Right? The pelvic floor functions automatically with your breath and your movement, but some of us can benefit from some improvement in that function. And I really do think that like all of us in some way can, because the pelvic floor works with everything. It contributes to your postural and respiratory.
Allison, you're frozen for me. Are you frozen for everybody else?
Frozen for me too.
Okay.
No, we lost our fearless leader.
Oh no.
So what color shirts did y'all get? I did the heather white.
I got gray. Warm.
Cute.
Mine hasn't come in yet.
Oh,
Mine either. But Amanda, you're West Coast too, right?
I am.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Did you get your yesterday?
Just yesterday. Yeah.
I suppose for me too, mine is international, so it's probably later.
Closed
Stuck
down.
at
Yeah.
customs.
Yeah.
Really nice. I
You
want
know
to wear
it.
How was everybody's run weeks?
Good.
Good.
So far, so good. Yeah. I'm advancing. So I was doing like 1-to-1 intervals. And so this week, starting today, I'll be doing 2-to-1. So very
Nice.
excited and
Yeah,
nervous for
that's
that.
great.
Yes. Yeah. Feeling pretty
So,
good.
did anybody, I didn't look from last night, did you find an app that would do that? Somebody was looking for an app that would help with the 1-to-1.
Or Allison told me about an app called Seconds.
Yeah.
That will let you do like intervals.
You're back.
Tell them to stop streaming their games.
They're outside.
No, I'm just kidding.
There it is. Okay. My other camera wasn't working. So I got like the blue screen of death, and then my computer restarted. Oh, what? Okay. So And that has happened to me before on Zooms, and I thought it was because like I never restart my computer. And so I'm very careful before our calls to restart my computer. So I did it before and it still did it. So I need a new computer, like really bad. I'll tell you guys a really embarrassing story because I thought I needed a computer even work, like more bad, I don't know, than I did. Because I have like, you know, just a laptop and then there's like the keyboard pad, the mouse pad right next to the keyboard. And so I would be typing and then like it would be like someone clicked somewhere like randomly elsewhere on the page. And so I was like, oh, my computer's broken. It keeps clicking all these other places. And then I realized like after months of this, that I was doing it with my own hands while I was typing. Like, wow. So the simple solution was to just get an extra keyboard. But anyway, so these are the things that I just like, I'm too busy to think about these things. Focus on what I'm doing now and worry about it later. All right, so let's see where, I'm glad I'm not the only one, Sarah. All right, back to where I was. And it's still recording, cool. I was afraid that it would have just. All right, share my screen. Okay, it's moving very slowly right now. Okay, so as I was saying, the pelvic floor works with, so it contributes to, you know, the postural respiratory functions that we talked about. It helps modulate the intra-abdominal pressure, which we use to like stabilize the spine through movement. You know, the diaphragm and the pelvic floor work together, preserve that intra-abdominal pressure and control intra-abdominal pressure, but it's also partially responsible for the stability of your sacroiliac joint. So like everything is connected in the back where the spine meets the pelvis. Like the pelvic floor plays a huge role in the stability of that. And that, like, we think of our core as our core, you know, abs, pelvic floor, diaphragm, but people who are like really serious about like being picky about what's the core of the body will actually say that the sacrum is your core because all movement goes through there. I mean, functional movement as we move. So, and the pelvic floor is like right there with that. So it's not just holding in your pee. It contributes to the control and stability of your lumbar spine, your pelvis, and then therefore the movement of your whole kinetic chain. So when it's overworking to help create stability, sometimes that can cause pelvic floor dysfunction. And when you like have pelvic floor dysfunction from other things, mom life, carrying a baby, childbirth, the things like that, it can cause different parts of the kinetic chain to overwork. So like everything is sort of connected there. And when a pelvic floor is dysfunctional, it doesn't necessarily mean always that it's weak. It could just be tired and overworked. And maybe just constantly trying to stay on to create stability there, and so that it can't do all of its other jobs. So I just want to think about like the pelvic floor is, I mean, it's not just the pelvic floor that we talk about and do Kegels kind of a thing. So we are going to talk about pelvic floor in terms of isolation, then integration, because we can't really talk about like integrating the pelvic floor with our functional movements without like being able to feel it first. So we're going to do one quick thing about trying to feel and isolating the pelvic floor. But if you're struggling with that or you have more questions about that, I think Addie would definitely be the go-to person for that. But then when we say integration, just like quickly looking at all of like the muscles that are there. Pelvic floor is a deep hip rotator. You know, if you look at the piriformis, that one that like tends to give us all this trouble, it's essentially a pelvic floor muscle. Obturator internus, these are those deep hip rotators that bug the heck out of a lot of us, and they're right in there with the pelvic floor. And the adductors, that's why we squeeze the block. Look at that, they're right there with the pelvic floor. Like all of these muscles work together. So, you know, again, hip pain and tightness can be a pelvic floor symptom, and the pelvic floor symptoms can be like related to your hip function. So I think this is, and like, why do we care about rotation? We're just talking about running forward. Like, rotation allows for linear movement. We're wanting to move forward, but every single step we take, we're doing externally rotating, internally rotating at our pelvis. So like, if we can't do that effectively, we can't move forward effectively. So if like kind of backtracking all the pieces together, like, yes, pelvic floor is the pelvic floor, but it's also a hip rotator. And why does rotation matter? Because that's what we're doing. We're really rotating to move forward. So let's just try one way, and I'm going to post all of these, and you have them if you printed out the 3 different ways, positions, because you might feel it more in one position or the other. So you can do it in side lying. We're going to practice it sitting because that's just where most of us. Ooh, shh, quiet you. Most of us are sitting, but you can also practice it in the all fours position. So I like sitting on a ball for this, but just sit wherever you are. And you know, we're practicing breathing now, but I feel like this practice of breathing in it, in purposeful anterior pelvic tilt and a posterior pelvic tilt was really helpful for me to feel the relaxing and the contracting, more so than anything else. And it may not be the thing that works best for you. And again, like this isolation of the pelvic floor is not my area of expertise, but we are going to try to like build on that feeling of the pelvic floor with other things. So let's just see if we can. So sitting, inhale deeply. We're going to relax the pelvic floor. You can even take your, Deanna, you came right in. We were talking about nipples, and now I'm going to talk about putting my hand in my crotch, but this is what we're doing. So you can even inhale and like try to feel the tissue in here. So if you find your sit bones, like what would sit on the chair when you sit down, just come a little bit in from the sit bones and like kind of dig your fingers into that tissue. And on the inhale, you don't want to feel like put pressure into your fingers. You just want it to feel like relax around your fingers. And then on the exhale, when you contract and pull up, you want to actually kind of feel it like get tense and then move up and away from your fingers if you can. Now, I feel like it's easier for me to feel it in neutral after I've gone through this process of feeling it in an anterior pelvic tilt. So put a big arch in your back and do it again. It's a lot easier for me to relax my back of the pelvic floor and contract the front of my pelvic floor in this position. And that you're putting yourself in anterior pelvic tilt to help do that. You guys feel any difference when you went into the anterior pelvic tilt?
I feel like I can't feel the engagement as well in anterior pelvic tilt. I feel like neutral.
Yeah, and then so when you rotate back into a posterior pelvic tilt, you feel it easier or not quite as easy, like compared to neutral?
Feels easier that direction.
Mm-hmm. In which one?
The posterior.
Yeah. And that's probably because most of us, we're all narrow. So in the pelvic floor, we have a more descended front of the pelvic floor and a more, did I say, I can't remember if I just said ascended, descended, but I meant descended front of the pelvic floor and a more ascended, like contracted, tight, if you will, back of the pelvic floor. So those back pelvic floor muscles are more like grabby than our front ones. So, but you all can feel somewhat of a connection, the contracting and relaxing of your pelvic floor. You understand what that feels like. All right. And you can try it in a bunch of other different positions. I'm going to post all 3 of these videos where I walk you through these a little bit more in detail below here. Okay. So now we're going to combine it with all of the movements. Before we go down and feel it, I want to just look at it, the pieces together. So the inhale, we already know that the diaphragm contracts down, the pelvic floor relaxes down. This is like in our gait as we move. With this, what also is happening is the hips externally rotating, A and abducting. The foot is supinating. This is all consistent with both push off and heel strike and gait, toe off and heel strike. That's what's happening. We're externally rotating, our foot supinating. We're not inhaling with every step like that, but what we are doing is rotating. And to me, that actually simulates almost like an inhale in your body. So we're gonna feel that connection, and then we can build on it in exercises. And then with the exhale, we already know, right, that the diaphragm relaxes up, the pelvic floor contracts in and up. With that, in gait, as we're moving, the hips internally rotate and adduct. Your adductors are on the whole time through gait for stability, actually. And the foot pronates, grounds into the floor. This is your mid-stance and gait. So you aren't breathing per se with every step, but you're going through this cycle with all these pieces connected with every step. So let's just practice and try this out together. So come down.
Can I ask you a quick, Allison, can I ask a quick question about the foot? And so when you say pronating and supinating, are you talking about this or this? Like, so do you see what I'm saying? So like, as the foot comes down, is it supinating and pronating on the edges this way, or is it turning? Is it
neither? Sort of. We're actually going to get into what true pronation and supination mean in a minute. But yeah, supination does in some ways mean you live a little bit more on the out edge of your foot. But supination is means actually having a like rigid foot. So rigid foot. And then pronation means like lengthened foot. So in running terms, actually, let's just get to it in a minute because, well, you might want to feel it to this. Let me skip ahead to that slide and then we'll come back to this because that's a good point. I think you do need to get your head wrapped around like what pronation and supination really mean. And I can get really annoyed about this listening to other running coaches talk about this because it's so misunderstood. Okay, so all right, can you see my slides now? Yes, okay. Oh my goodness. All right, so pronation is typically thought of in the like running shoe world as falling in to the inside of your foot. And it sort of, that happens a lot of times with people who over pronate, but that's a whole kinetic chain situation, like falling in to the middle. Pronation itself is the arch lowering down, the foot flattening out and spreading out and getting like wider and longer. We want this to happen when we run because when that happens, we're like loading the tendons in the foot so that when we go into supination, especially on toe off, we have supination with the big toes dorsiflexed. That's the arch comes up, you create a more rigid, shorter, narrower foot, and then you have this like rigid point to push off of, and you take advantage of all of the energy that went into flattening it out and then pulling it back up and pushing forward. Does that make sense? So supination is typically thought of living more on the outsides of your feet, and people who like I'm an high arches, rigid foot, over supinator person. So I do live on the outsides of my feet, but that's not like the only part of it. So what I want you to, for this exercise, where we're connecting the things, all I want you to really think about pronation is like grounding into the floor. And we're gonna dig a lot deeper into what that means in a little bit. But pronation is grounding into the floor, and supination is like the feet, the arches coming up and the feet getting rigid. So let's try it. All right, so I never know what to do with this chair. You can find a seat where your back is to the wall. And at first, we're just gonna practice the inhale. And for the inhale, you can have your feet like way close up to you because that helps with that relaxing of the pelvic floor position. So on an inhale, remember, diaphragm comes down, pelvic floor relaxes, and now we're adding in some pieces. We're adding in the external rotation, a deduction. So you're gonna put your hands on the outside of your knees and press into your hands as you inhale. And then just do a regular exhale. We don't need to force the exhale right now. Inhale. Kind of relax the pelvic floor. Press into your knees. And exhale. You cannot really get like effective true supination if you don't pronate first. So when we combine inhale and exhale, do both together, then I'll have you sense your feet. So for now, just do the external rotation. Inhale, press. All right, now we'll do the exhale. So step your feet a little bit further out because it's hard to contract your pelvic floor in that position. And switch your hands. So now you have your hands on the inside, so you have to crisscross them, and you're pushing on the inside of your knees. So same inhale. So we'll let the pelvic floor relax, use your diaphragm, and then on the exhale, contract the pelvic floor and press into your hands. And then just inhale, let it relax. Exhale. Press into your hand. Do a couple more. All right, we're gonna do one more little thing there where we do one side at a time, but first I want to check in with you all, see if you were feeling it, how it feels. I know a couple of you have tried this before, but not with me live. Anybody? And if you guys, you can stay unmuted while we're doing this, so you don't have to come and unmute as long as there's not somebody else yelling around in your house. What do you feel? You're not sure?
One was easier. I thought like I could feel.
Which one was?
With my feet further out.
Yeah.
I could feel the breath more. I could feel one. So my right foot gives me a lot of trouble.
Okay.
And I could definitely feel that I couldn't ground that foot like I could the left.
Okay.
Yeah, I had done this before through your postpartum return to running. And so but it felt easier this time. Like I felt like my body and mind had kind of like gotten some practice, like muscle memory. So that's good. I don't know if it's still where it should be, but it feels better.
Yeah, so this is a really important practice for me because like I have a strong pelvic floor. I've gone to pelvic floor physical therapist, but I still, if I don't, like if I'm tired, it just doesn't coordinate right. I don't think. Like I'm self-diagnosing now, but maybe Addie will have something to say about that. But I just don't feel like it coordinates. So I actually do, and I'll show you one, and it's part of the warm up now. If you feel like you want practice with this before running, you can cue the coordination. So let's do it just one leg at a time. So get back into the same position. So I think it's easier to feel both if you're just focusing on one leg. So just let one leg hang out, and then have the other leg out in front of you. And just kind of do the same, more natural out in front of you that we did with the exhale. So from here, we're going to combine the two on the same leg.
So inhale, press in, exhale, contract, ground into the floor. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Let's do 2 more on this side, and then we'll do the other side. Last one. So with that, maybe you felt a little bit more of like the movement of the foot with the coordination grounding into, and some people feel this is harder on one side than the other for sure. You have something to say, Amanda? You look like you're coming.
No, I was just adjusting the volume.
Okay. All right, now let's do the other side. And I want you to pay attention, see if one side is easier for you to coordinate than the other. So inhale, press out, exhale, contract the pelvic floor, ground the foot, inhale, exhale. Do 3 more. All right. Do you guys notice any differences from one side to the other at all?
I don't, but I feel like where this gets hard for me is when I take it, you know, the standing flow. That's where like this gets harder for me.
Which part of the standing flow do you think is harder?
I feel like it's hard for me to like just pay attention to it all. Like I'm trying not to tilt my pelvis when I'm squatting down. I'm trying to do like, it's just hard to integrate it all. Like that's where the integration falls apart.
Yeah, so it could be worth just staying with the seated one for now and then progressing to the standing one. I think either one is a good coordination exercise. The standing, I just try, to be completely honest, the warm-ups are designed in the way that they are, not necessarily because they are the best exercises to do before a run, but because I found that if I give you my runners, like anything that requires them to sit down or lay down before they're going to go run, they're not going to do it. You know, so that's part of the reason why the standing flow is part of the warm up, but you could totally just sit down and do it and then progress to that when you're comfortable with the standing. But truthfully, my warm ups are like, I promise I'm not going to make you lay down on the ground before you go run, because I found that most people will just skip it, and then what good does that do? Yeah, something, Deanna?
Yeah, on the right side, on my right side only, I feel like this right here, I feel like a pull like right here with I don't know if I'm just like favoring that or if there's something about that when breathing, breathing in and out.
Yeah, so that's actually really common. We're going to get into all the asymmetries, the common asymmetries, and then how some of us end up with compensations on top of that where we don't fit into the common asymmetries. But just to preview, most people have a asymmetry where they have a harder time using their adductors and getting internal rotation on their left side, and then their right side, the adductor almost works over drive because of that, and the right side has a harder time typically getting into more hip extension and like the push off phase of gait. So you can almost think about it as like your left side is like, some people's left side are stuck in heel strike and some people's left side are stuck in toe off, and that's a whole nother conversation. But the left side has a hard time in stance and the right side has a hard time in toe off typically. So we're all kind of like running a little bit lopsided. And then we layer compensations on top of that. Today, we're going to look at the difference, really dig down into the difference of your feet potentially, and then come back up to the pelvis next week. So just these things to like think about and pay attention to. And then like, oh, so I did have this slide in here real quick. What does this mean for like the rest of your body, right? So we talked about being narrow versus wide from the very beginning. A narrow has a more like external bias of the pelvis, so a more descended pelvic floor. So typically the people who are wide narrow tend to be in that external presentation more. If you look at it, more inhale bias, more supinated, all of those things. Now you can layer compensations on top of that, which a lot of us do, but we kind of need, and that's why we're training more squeezing the block on the exhale with the pelvic floor. I've already had you like start to incorporate some of those connections, maybe without even talking about it. And then the wide kind of has opposite and greater bias towards internal rotation. The anterior pelvic floor is more ascended, and then we're living more potentially in pronation in that like more mid stance of gait. So, and then there's that typical asymmetry layered on top of all of this. So we'll kind of build that out over the next couple of weeks. And yeah, we can play with this connection in a whole bunch of different ways. So that standing flow we're just talking about is the same idea. Inhaling in the middle, exhaling, adducting, internal rotating, grounding into the floor, really feeling the floor on those as well. And then this one showed up in the postpartum foundations course, and you'll see it again in the next couple of weeks. But this is the same idea too, except it's a whole nother combination of different things. I'm exhaling, internally rotating, grounding into my foot, and then inhaling, externally rotating, coming up out of it. So we can build these into a lot of our exercises, and we are over time. But what I want to look at today to really dig into, if it'll go, lots more of this pelvic floor stuff from Addie and Addie. I specifically like sought out someone who uses this same, it's called postural restoration model of looking at it. So she's versed in the like wide, narrow, the typical asymmetries, all of that kind of stuff, but she looks at it from a more pelvic floor centered lens. So at the end, I'm going to drop some questions in for you. If you, I think I recommended you guys start to follow her already in the email for this week. Her Instagram reel game is just like on point. She'll keep you entertained and like give you information at the same time. So, so now, actually, before we dive into feet, are there any like pelvic floor things that you think that I can answer that like you just need to know right now? No? Okay. All right, so this thing is creepy. It's this thing of nightmares, but it's really cool to think about. So this is called the homunculus. It's a map of like the areas of our brain which connected to the different parts of our body. I think it's really cool to think about how close the feet and the genitals are in our brain, and then how that matters for the rest of your body. So I told you guys in the email that I think I will tell my story with this a little bit, so it kind of gives you some context of why I'm like so like pelvic floor and feet. I still, no matter what I did, my pelvic floor is strong. I've strength trained, like do all the things, make yourself get stronger. And I still like was struggling with leaking with running, no matter like, felt like what I did, went to a bunch of different pelvic floor physical therapists, and learning about the connection between the feet and the pelvic floor. And I mentioned before that I'm like, I have crazy high arches. My feet don't move, like they just don't pronate. And so I feel like that was my missing piece. I've been working on pronating and I don't leak at all anymore. And I'm not saying this is like the magic, like pelvic floor cure all for everybody, but I think that the connection between the pelvic floor and the feet is super powerful, and not just the pelvic floor and the feet. Like I mentioned this, actually, I think I have this on one of the slides, but I mentioned this in our presentation in the masterclass, that some models have predicted that if you kind of fine tune all the different like pieces of your body, that 17% of the energy, the force needed to run, can originate from just the arch coming down and recoiling with every step. Like 17% is a lot. And I'm sure this is like perfect conditions that we probably are never going to be able to like fully emulate, but we can think about maybe tweaking some little things so that we can capitalize on that a little bit more. So it's foot and pelvic floor, but not just pelvic floor. All the things are connected. We're loading, pronating, pelvic floor ascending, propelling, supinating, pelvic floor descending. So we're going to dive really deep into pronating and supinating. And I think those words and they get a bad rap in the running world, because you go into a running store and someone will be like, oh, well, you over supinator, here's like some high cushion shoes for support, go wear these, it'll fix all your problems. But like, if you're just running on marshmallows, you're definitely not taking advantage of this like pronate, supinate with every step. And I think it's helpful because it can help your body orient, because if you really do over supinate, and you may live way more in external rotation when you're moving because of the foot in itself, and if you give the foot more support, maybe your hips can balance out a little bit better while you run, and it will help. But I think it's sort of like somewhat of a band-aid, and it doesn't necessarily, I don't think it should stop there. So there's no problem with like going to get some shoes that you think might help, but over time, potentially looking more at your feet is where to go. So pronation is the arch elongating. So if you just think about the foot as this simple spring, like 2 levers with a spring attached. When you're pronating, this is coming down and the spring is stretching. Hi, Nate. And then when you are supinating, the foot gets shorter, narrower, and this spring recoils. So you're loading the spring with pronation, and the spring is recoiling with supination, and with every single step. So I think max supination happens at that big toe, at toe off, where the big toe is dorsiflexed. That's called the windlass mechanism. So if you add in the dorsiflexion here of the toe, you can pull the arch up even more and get more out of that spring. So having that big toe mobility, which we talked about from the very beginning, is an important part of this too. So you can pronate and supinate on a flat foot, but then you add in that big toe dorsiflexion at toe off, and you get like next level supination. So we go through this cycle. Max pronation happens kind of somewhere in mid stance. I think get max supination at toe off. And I feel like in my head, the foot's existing somewhere on the supinated side, but not like fully supinated when you hit the ground. So again, capitalizing on this, we can get more energy out of the foot to run. So what this looks like, I kind of took that picture. This X in the middle is like a neutral foot, not pronated, not supinated. This is where your foot would just like hang out when you're laying there. At heel strike, you're somewhere on the supinated side, and then go to mid stance, you're pronating, you're loading the spring. And then at mid stance, you cross some threshold and you go back to supination towards toe off, and you're releasing the spring. And this is in like an ideal situation. Now we talked about, you can go to the running store and someone might tell you like you are an overpronator, and they'll give you shoes to support your arches. But really what, if you think about an overpronation, or I like to think about it more as stuck in pronation, your like center is way over here on the pronation side. So at heel strike, you're still on this like kind of flat-ish foot. You don't have a lot of space to load, and then your release is like not quite the same. This is typically looked at again as someone who more rolls onto the inside of their foot, and it goes up the chain, and it kind of they're connected. And you get a whole host of problems from being stuck in pronation. You can get hip, knee issues, instability, plantar fasciitis, because the plantar fascia is just pronated, stretched out all the time. IT pin syndrome, bunions, are lots of things for people who like live in this pronation side. But you also have the limited ability to store energy in your spring. So I'm not gonna like completely hate on the shoe industry, but just think about this for a second. Typically for overpronators, more like arch support is prescribed. So the arch's job is to like, as it's coming down, is to absorb some of that shock. So if you have a support underneath that arch, the arch is still not absorbing the shock. So what's absorbing the shock somewhere up the chain? Something else. So maybe you're fixing your like lowered arch, but it's still, something's going to be amiss in the chain up above, and you're still not going to have the capability to load and release that energy. So I think of someone who's more stuck in pronation as someone who needs more strength in their feet, more rigidity in their feet, and more balance strength in the rest of the chain above. Everything's connected. So more abduction and external rotation. Now we can look at this on the other side. Someone who's stuck in supination has their center way over here closer to supination. This is me. Like I'm in the group of trainers that I work with, they refer to like supinated feet as, it's not quite Allison level feet, but like it's supinated. So this is where I live, way over here in supination. So it's this rigid foot. The arch just doesn't move, isn't able to come down. So the spring doesn't load quite as much. You stop kind of halfway maybe to pronation, just throwing it out there, and then the releasing of the spring. So typically over supination is thought of someone who rolls out onto the outside of their feet. And I totally do. Like that's how I sprain my ankles all the time, because I just live on the outside of my feet. But it's bigger than that, because you don't have the ability to move that foot, and that force gets absorbed higher up in the kinetic chain. Stress fractures, knee pain, more excessive strain on the fascia of the foot, but in a different way, because it's just like rigid, leading to plantar fasciitis, those kinds of things, and lowered ability to capitalize on this recoil of the spring. So typically for someone who's over supinating, soft shoes with a wider toe box are prescribed. Now, wider toe boxes are good for everybody. We'll talk about that in a minute, but what happens with that is you get this loss of ability to feel the ground. And that can effectively change the whole stride, how your body kind of like moves reflexively as you move and feel the ground. Your foot is a huge part of that. And you just take like super cushy shoes, just kind of take the foot out of the equation. And I think that you lose a lot by doing that. Yes, it can help. But I think it's only part of the equation, because you miss out on that ability to store and release energy. So what you really need is then more pronation, more ability to lengthen the foot and balance strength in the rest of the kinetic chain, more adduction, most likely more internal rotation. So the ideal shoe, because I don't want to just like hate on, we need to wear shoes when we're running. There's a huge like barefoot craze in running, but studies have shown that barefoot running actually has energy costs associated with it. So really you want like just enough to protect the foot, but not so much that the foot can't do its job. And that might mean something different for everybody. Wider toe boxes are, you can never go wrong with that. One trick is to like take the insole out of your shoe and stand on it, like the piece on the inside. And if your foot goes over the insole of your shoe in the front, when you stand, put your body weight on your foot, then that's not wide enough. So, because your feet, it's going to not allow your feet to actually lengthen. You know, pronation is arch falling, but it's also the whole foot lengthening to make it happen. And then minimal heel drop, again, this can mean something different to everybody. And if you're interested in decreasing your heel drop, don't go from like 12 to 0 drop shoes right away. Go down in increments. In any of these things, don't make huge sweeping changes in your shoes, especially if you're in the middle of like a high volume training cycle. Maybe start working on some of this foot stuff. And then when you're in a more low volume, like rest and recover, maybe that's a time to maybe try to change on your shoes and see if you can play with some of these things. Okay, if you have any like questions after we go through this and we get to know your feet, whether you maybe are more pronated, more supinated, and those kinds of things, let me know in the group and we can talk about which, there's a whole list of like shoes for different types of feet I can go through. But it's not all about the shoes. So it's what your feet are doing in the shoes that really matters. So I talked a lot about like hating on the shoes and finding the right kind of shoes, but really is like, what can your feet do in the shoes? So I want to go through this foot pressure distribution worksheet with you. And if you guys have your socks, we can try some basic pronation drills. So the first thing I want you to do, and you can note it on your little worksheet thing, I want you to just get to know where you feel your pressure distribution in your feet. So if you get up and you just kind of like take a little walk around and then stop. And unmute yourself if you can right now, so we can kind of talk about it. The first thing, stop my share. The first thing I want you to do is just like take a little walk, and as you naturally would, just stop. Don't think about how your feet are supposed to be. Now just, where do you feel it? Do you feel more weight in your right foot or your left foot? Just focus on that at first. And if more on one side, can you put a number to it? Is it like 60-40, 70-30? And then from there, just focus on your left foot. On your left foot, do you feel more of the pressure in the heel or in the toe? And then divide your left foot into 4 quadrants, like on the picture. If you felt it more in the heel, did you feel it more on the inside of the heel or the outside of the heel? If you felt it more in like the pad of your foot, did you feel it more on like the inside or the outside of your pad? And I want you to kind of make like a little circles or dots on your foot, or any way you can really think about kind of mapping your foot on that piece of paper. And then same thing with your right. Divide your foot into front and back, toe and heel. Do you feel it more in your toe or more in your heels? And then divide that into 4 quadrants. And if you felt it more in the heel, was it more on the inside or was it more on the outside? And then same thing with the front. And then real quick, we'll just talk about what you guys are seeing. Interesting. That makes sense. So that, wait,
This-
what's your right foot and what's the left foot?
That one's right.
Okay.
That one's left.
Okay. Yeah, I think your pattern is a little bit different than what's like the typical pattern, because you are feeling this like here. Most people have that restriction in their lat on the right side. So I'm interested to try to play with this a little bit with you. So that tells me if you're like more heel on one side and toe on that opposite side, your whole pelvis or your body is rotated that way,
Yeah.
and to some degree or another.
Okay.
What about you, Deanna? Okay. So more on the,
The left foot feels really, really even, and the right foot feel like I can feel the left foot pad just like spread and connect, and the right one, like I can't even, I mean, I didn't try to change it, but like I can't feel like the whole pad touching
okay.
or with pressure.
And you feel it mostly on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
Was it more on the left or the right, like total, like right foot versus left foot?
The left foot felt more grounded. I don't know. Yeah.
The left foot.
It didn't feel like more weight, but just felt like more like spread out, flat, touching.
Okay. So did anyone feel like most of their weight in their heels or versus like their toes just bilaterally, like both feet? Or is it one side versus the other for everybody?
I definitely like way more on my right side. And depending on how I stopped, it was either like leaning forward on toes or back on heel, but then like kind of along the outside of my whole right foot, either way.
Okay. So, and then what about your left foot? Just not as much weight there at all in general?
Yeah, not as much weight there at all. Like I could hardly even feel like where the pressure was the most because it was so heavy on my right side.
Okay. So yeah, you're probably more just like living on your right side.
Yeah.
In general, which is super common actually. Carrie, did you have
I had a struggle with the baby at the time, but kind of tried to make it work. I could feel it mostly throughout the outside of my left foot on both front and back. But on my right foot, I could feel the front left quadrant and the back right quadrant. So like the back outside of my heel and the front inside of my toe pad. That makes sense.
On the right? Was that the
Yeah.
right?
I don't have the sheet, so I wasn't able to color it.
So now let's look a little bit about how your feet move. So what I want you to do is just, let me see if I want to bring my camera down a little bit. Okay. So just take your finger underneath your like arch and then lift your toes. Does your arch move away from your toes?
Move away from my toes?
Yeah, like when you lift, not toes, fingers. Yeah, you said it back to me. I'm like, wait, that doesn't make sense. Yeah. Does your arch move away from your fingers when you lift your toes?
What do we do again? Okay, lift our toes.
Do you feel your arch move at all?
I don't feel like my arch moves much. There is, I'm going to call it a string. It's probably a tendon that feels like when I've been doing the massage, it's incredibly tight in the sense that as soon as I start to move my toes, it like closes down.
Okay.
If that makes
Yeah, that's one of your plantar fascia. That's
normal than it would tension, because when you lift your toes, that's what you're doing. That's like that
Right.
supination, tensioning of that tendon right there. But I just want to
Okay.
see, like, does your arch move, and then try it on the other side. Because my right arm, like, literally does not move when we do this, but it's already so high.
Yeah, I definitely feel on my left, not on the right.
Okay. So now, and this is more of a like, a little bit of a just get to know your feet, your asymmetries, and a little bit of a test retest. I think we're gonna skip the pen test, but it's something that you can try. Essentially what you do, we want your feet to pronate. Pronate is lengthen. So if you take a pen and you let it be at the tip of your toe, and then you try to lengthen your foot by driving your knee over your toe, can you move the toe? I mean, move the pen. That's just another little thing to try. See, I can do this a little bit with my left, but not really with my right at all. All right, so now I want to see just how your foot moves when you move. So, and then we're going to build on this to actually like try to get your feet to move more ideally. So now I just want you to stand like you're walking, like you're about to take a step, one foot in front of the other, and just bend that front knee over the toe. Doesn't matter what side you start on. And what I want you to pay attention to is, where does the foot pressure travel? As you travel, the knee travels over your foot, where does it travel? Does it go from, like, for example, from the outside heel to the outside of the front toe pad? Does the pressure stay in your heels? Does it travel from like the outside heel to the inside toe pad? What happened?
I think mine goes heel to front toe pad, or
Okay.
inside toe pad.
And which foot was that?
Both.
On both?
Let me see. Let me do it again. Maybe it's more evenly spread on my right foot.
Okay. Which foot was it that you said you lived more on the outside of?
The right foot.
Okay, so now that you've felt what it feels like naturally, what we want, we're kind of like mimicking what should happen in pronation with this. Like, pronation is mid-stance, we're going over the foot. In pronation, ideally, the pressure travels from the outside of your heel to the underneath the toe pad of your big toe as you step forward. So now let's see if we can make it happen. If you, we're gonna kind of break this into stages. I want to get you through, I know we're kind of going over time on this one. I want to go through a simple pronation drill for you. Even if you kind of like need more supination. Actually, like, real quick before we do this, have you guys ever been told at a running store like that you're more supinated or more pronated or anything like that?
I've always been told I was neutral.
Sorry?
I've always been told I was neutral.
Neutral? Okay. Anybody else? No?
I've
Okay.
never had a professional foot person look at my feet though, so.
Okay. So the idea here with these, we're going to be doing pronation drills. Some of you might actually need more supination than pronation, but you have to supinate to pronate, just the same as like you have to relax a muscle to contract a muscle. So we're going to do pronation drills, but we're going to see if those of you who had trouble with the supination, like if your arch didn't move, getting pronation might help you pull that arch back up. So let me take you through this. What I want you to do first is just walk around and just see what your feet feel like on the ground. How grounded do you feel? Do you feel more grounded on one side than the other? And then we'll start with the left, just because so I want everyone to start with the left leg there, taking a step forward with the left leg in front. And if you can, turn your body to the side of the camera like this, so I can just see how you're moving, and point down at your feet, because that'll help me cue you. You don't have to if it's not really going to work for you, but turn around, Sarah, so I can see the arch side of your left foot with your left foot in front. Yeah, okay. So what I want you to do first is just shift the weight over your left foot. With your hands on your hips, shifting the weight over your left foot. Keep that right foot grounded if you can. Just shift the weight over. You want your left hip to hike up just a little bit when you shift the weight over. If you're feeling this more in your low back as we do this, it probably means that you're not hiking up your hip. So just kind of reset, shift the weight over, and just hike that hip up just a little bit. So when I step this foot, this hip will just go like a little bit up. Not like super hiked, but just kind of making space to move. Okay, so from here, what I want you to do is at the knee. Don't force this from the hips. Move by bending your knee towards your big toe. So super duper slowly, don't force it. Your knee towards the big toe. And then keep at the end, this heel can come off the ground, but keep the back leg straight. Slowly bend, and then come back to one more. All right, do any of you feel like when you come forward, your toes are gripping at the ground for stability? Anybody? Nobody? Is that a no? If you do feel like you're kind of like gripping into the ground with your toes, I'll show you what I mean by that. Like, see how like more pressure is getting like that onto my toes? If you feel like that, I'll show you what to do. That's where the socks come in. You're gonna take your sock and roll it up underneath the pad of just your toes, so that the pad of your foot can ground into the ground. Sometimes when we grip with our toes, we can't really ground the toe pad, and then we're not going to be able to like really feel the pronation and supination. So that's like the first application of socks, and why I asked you to bring them. All right, so now, and I used to need the socks, I don't need them quite as much anymore. And sometimes even this is a good thing to do if you find yourself doing like gripping with your toes in any of your exercises, squats, split squats, anything, your deadlifts, you can just get those toes off the ground so you can ground into your foot pad. Okay, so now as you go forward, feel the pressure move by that big toe. Allow yourself to kind of like turn towards me in the camera a little bit. Well, not you, Carrie, because you're facing the other way, but you'll turn away from me. And then when you come back, imagine the pressure traveling from underneath that big toe to the outside heel of that foot. Lead with that knee, go super duper slow, so that at the end, your knee is over your big toe and your hips are still over your heels. You're not leaning forward. You're gonna try to do it a little bit more soft with the knee. And don't force it. Do any of you feel like your heel of that front foot, when you come all the way to your toe, you lose the pressure in your heel? Anybody?
I do.
You do? Okay, so now take another saw. Here, so I'm getting my camera on the floor. Okay, so now you'll take another sock and put it under your heel. And you might need to adjust here if you're feeling like you lose the pressure more towards the outside. You can kind of move it a little bit, just as like a sensory awareness, like, okay, I feel my heel. So now let's just do a couple more like that. I'm going to take you through the full cues. All right, so shift your weight over to that front leg side. So allow that heel to hike just a little bit. Soften at the knee. Lead with the knee. Don't force it with your hips. Extend the knee of the back leg. This will almost turn your body away from that standing leg a little bit. And then imagine the pressure once you get there, traveling across your foot from the big toe to the outside heel while keeping that whole foot still grounded. So don't lift the front of the toe when you do it. Lead from the knee, straightening. The movement will come from bending the knee and straightening the knee. Okay, before we do the other side, take a little walk and see if you feel like any different in that foot. And you might not after like the first and only time of doing this, but you might feel a little bit more grounded. Did anybody feel that in their glutes at all when they were doing it on that standing leg? No. I meant to get a pedicure before this day, but it didn't happen. All right, let's do same thing other side. So start without anything, because everybody's feet are different. You might not need the same props on one side versus the other. Like you're gonna take a step. Let me come back over here because I want you guys to be able to see my hips. Like you're gonna be taking a step. Now the heel of this back foot can come off the ground at the end if it needs to, but keep, like almost lock that knee out, not completely lock. So it kind of allows, at the very end, you're gonna turn slightly towards or away from that foot. All right, so shift your weight to over that front foot so that hip hikes a little bit. Soften from the knee, don't drive from the hips, over your big toe. Just do 2 or 3 like this. And then first check in, are you gripping at all with your toes? If you are, you might feel like you need a little bit more help grounding into the pad of your foot. Same thing, bring this underneath your toes. And go again. Knee towards the big toe, but keep the hips back over your heels. At the end of it, this leg straightens. So you're turning towards me, away from that leg. And then let the foot pressure travel from the underneath the big toe to the outside heel as you come back. If you feel like your heel is coming off, now go ahead and add that extra little sensory cue. Now, some of you might even feel like you're gripping with your other toes of your back foot. Now, I do this more when my right foot's in the back, but if you need to put up your back toes because those are gripping, try that. It's weird. When I get pronation on my right, I get this weird pop in my ankle.
Allison, I can't really get into like my big toe on the right side.
Okay. Can you come a little bit? Is there any way for me to see your foot, or is that your camera station?
See,
Can you back just a little bit? Yeah. No, just do. I can't hear you all of a sudden for some reason.
hear me now.
Yeah.
When I
Okay.
move forward, I can just feel it into like the pad, and I don't really feel any pressure into the big toe.
Oh, do you want, I meant the pad, sorry. You want the pad underneath the big toe. Yeah, you want to feel the pressure like, oh, my feet are dirty. Right here.
Oh, I can feel that, yeah.
Okay, good. So was it easier to feel more on one side or the other? Yeah, your feet pronate, supinate. Feel any different now that you've tried it?
I feel that this world of feet is very new to me.
Yeah, it definitely takes some practice.
Yeah.
And like knowing what to feel. It's really hard to like connect with it all. Real quick though, if we can just all do that foot pressures thing from the beginning and just see if there's any difference in how, and I don't expect everyone or anyone to really feel any differences just after doing it one time. But if there's any difference in the way your foot pressures sit when you stand. You sit when you stand.
I do notice a bit of a difference in terms of being able to feel the whole foot as opposed to just different parts of the feet.
Good, awesome. So this was sort of did you feel any difference, Sarah or Deanna?
Yeah, I feel like I feel the whole foot, or I'm more aware of all of my foot instead of, yeah, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. All right, yeah, that's exactly what the goal of just doing these super simple pronation drills is, right? Because if we're living on the outside or the inside, like I said, you might need a little bit more supination, although I would guess that most of us need a little bit more pronation than supination in general. You might need a little bit more supination, but you have to get pronation first. So going through that pronation drill, it's just going to get your feet, just even them all out a little bit more. The idea being that if we do these in the way that our body needs, so this may not be the foot drill that you guys need. There's a whole world of feet. And if you guys want to explore the world of feet any further, there are 2 resources for you on like that last slide. So this course, Wake Up Your Feet, it's like 15 pounds. I think that's about $20 now with US conversions, although it changes like every day, but that's super cheap. And it takes you through all the different assessments, all the different drills, and really helps you get to know your feet. It's called Wake Up Your Feet. There's another one called Wake Up Your Body. It doesn't do quite as much feet, but it touches on your feet and then the connection up the chain. Like I said, we're going to like use the foot as part of the conversation and looking at our asymmetries next week. But if you want to dive into it, or if you want someone to like coach you through it, Raleigh is the one who's coaching me through it. And she does I think it's an hour-and-a-half session for 67 pounds, which is like about 100-ish US dollars. And then from there, she'll give you workout fit stuff to do at home and all that kind of stuff. And I think I honestly been telling her she should raise her prices. So if you want her to do that, you should ask her soon. But those are the 2 things to like go a little bit further in to the feet, and like just real quick to wrap it all up, because I know I went over, is, all the pieces are connected. And today we just kind of like talked about 2 of the pieces, But when you're loading, going from heel strike to mid stance, your foot is pronating, your pelvic floor is ascending, you're internally rotating, all of those pieces are connected. And then from mid stance, you are rebounding, propelling, your foot is supinating, your pelvic floor is descending, and you need both of the pieces to have an effective stride, whatever it talks about. We could say this in every different context. You need to pronate to supinate. You need to internal rotate to externally rotate. You need the pelvic floor to descend to ascend, like all the things. We need both. Some of us need to train one end of that more than the other, but we need both. And so we've been kind of focusing on, in the first sets of workouts, trying to give you more of the one that you don't have as much of. That makes sense in terms of rotation of the hips, because you can look at this two different ways. You can say that the foot is like dictating everything going up. You can think that it's coming down the chain all the way from the thorax and the breathing. You can think about it as originating at the pelvis and going out from there. And I think that it's a combination of all those things. But as you know, strength training, we focus a lot more on like this part of our body, but everything is connected. So way more on the pelvic floor on Sunday. If you have any pelvic floor related questions, I'm going to post, I just rolled over a squeaky toy. I'm going to post the question in the group now, and then I'll see you. Who is going to be able to make it on Sunday? Everybody?
I'm going to try.
Yeah, I should be able to make it, but I'll be driving down to see my sister. But I just texted her. I was like, remind me to make this call.
Which is Becca?
Yeah, going down to Ridgecrest to see her.
Cool. All right. Well, if you guys have any questions for her, I'll record that too. So post them in the group. Hopefully this whole thing recorded, because I'm supposed to send it to her. Any other questions in general for me about any of this stuff? I know it was like, here's a taste of all this really different stuff you've never done before. But
The pronation drills, how often would you suggest doing those?
okay, well,
Or do you have a suggestion for that?
it really depends. I would say start introducing them slowly at first. So if you felt a difference with doing them today, I think I mentioned this in the email, like if you really felt like, wow, my feet are moving in a way that they haven't moved before, I would even say if you had a run plan for later today, like be careful about, yeah. So I do them before all my workouts now, but I wouldn't necessarily start that way. I would start doing them like maybe before you do your strength workouts and go for a walk, and then start integrating with run days more down the line. And it also depends on if you're doing them right. So I would say if you do these pronation drills and you're feeling it in your low back, stop doing them, because you're not doing them right.
Okay.
And then that's where you would want to I could do a call with you, offer to do a call with you and really watch you go through, because it's hard to give the quick cues to everybody doing it on a group call. But honestly, I would, if you're interested in doing something like that, Raleigh is way better at it than I am.
Okay.
Or you can take yourself through, but I think it really helps to have someone cue you, and she is just phenomenal. I've been taking she's doing these small group courses with trainers and teaching us how to cue, and we're cueing each other. And it's poorly timed because tomorrow is the last one and it's my job to cue her. This should have been last week. But I didn't know about this small group thing that she came up with until after I planned this all out. But yeah, she's just so knowledgeable about the foot and will help you make sure if you're doing it right, and decide if this is like the drill for you, and help you connect it to all the different parts of the body if you really want to dive into your feet. But I think that it is super valuable. But I would definitely caution, if you're feeling it in your lower back, you're probably not doing it right. And then in that case, just don't do it until you either troubleshoot with me, or get in touch with Raleigh, or do that course potentially.
Allison, I have a quick question about arches.
You're very quiet again.
Very quiet.
Yeah, there you are again.
I'll shout. No.
No, it came back. I think your sound kind of keeps going in and out.
Where's your arch? Is this your arch, or like the underneath the foot? Because you guys were just talking about like tendons or things. Like,
Yeah, so under here,
show me where the arch is when you say the arch is moving up and down.
I wish I cleaned my feet before this call. I walk barefoot all the time, so the arch, I want to know if it moves, like out here, if it comes up. You might feel here, there's a tendon that runs down. That will probably may even come down because it's stretching.
I felt that.
The arch, like the bones of the foot, should come up. This is not, it's hard to see because there should be, your ankle bone is actually like part of your foot bone. I asked for a foot model for Christmas, and then he got me one without the tibia. It's not helpful. It's helpful, but imagine there's another bone here. When, point down. When the arch comes up, the bones kind of like come together, but that tendon's still going to be there on the bottom underneath. And that is actually going to be like sort of tight across the bottom. And then when it pronates, it lengthens on all the bones come down, stretch out. So it happens from the outside of your heel across the midfoot to the big toe, like the whole foot should stretch out. And then in supination, the whole foot kind of comes up and becomes really rigid here between all these bones.
Thanks.
William was petrified of this. And like, I don't even know, how does he know that like what a skeleton, and that he should be scared of something like this? But like, it was the scariest thing to him. Like, he wouldn't go. When I opened it on Christmas, he was like, get me away from that thing.
When I was in PA school, they gave us skulls to take home in skull boxes to study like cranial nerves and stuff. And I remember my roommate found the skull box, and I hadn't told her like, hey, I'm gonna have a human skull like home with me right now. And she was like, what is this?
Oh my goodness. That's hilarious.
I was like, I did not murder anybody, I promise. Not this time at least.
All right, so that's all I have for today, unless you guys have anything else. And if anything comes up, like as you're playing with these, trying the different foot things, I would encourage you to go through the whole like assessment thing again. And then do the pronation drills, and then go through it like again after. I sort of like gave you before and the same thing twice to see if you do like feel. I mean, you guys said you all feel a little bit more grounded, which is good, because that's exactly what I'd want you to feel after doing them. But all right, cool. Sarah, if you want to stay on. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much. That was great. Bye, y'all.